Hello, and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast. This is episode 89, Writing Music People Like to Sing, with Alan Bullard. The next Oxford Press conversation is with Alan Bullard, and I was able to speak to Alan about his life, career, and approach to choral music. We talked about what it was like to study with Herbert Howells, and of course, a fanboy moment for all of us, what an experience that must have been. That we talked about the need for music for flexible voicings, which I honestly knew intuitively, but it was nice to hear a composer talk about how important it is to serve the choir that maybe isn't the 16. Maybe they're not an evenly balanced ensemble, and maybe it's a church choir with different people there each week. So that was a really good reminder that you'll want to stick around for. We also talked about the contrasting economy of sheet music sales in the US and the UK. Apparently, we don't have the same tastes over here as they do over there, as well as his approach to compositional imposter syndrome. So the idea that he has to ask himself is, are people really enjoying this? Do people really like what I'm writing, or am I just writing what I like? That constant back and forth that must go on in a composer's mind. And I especially enjoyed his advice to younger composers that comes up towards the end of the episode, where he looks back and thinks on his long career, and it's okay to promote yourselves as a composer. It's not bragging to drop one of your links now in the modern social media landscape into a Facebook chat or whatever, so that people see your music. It's just how the business works. So sit back, relax, and get to know Alan. Don't forget, the Choralosophy Podcast is completely listener supported, so that means I need you to use that promo code at some of our awesome mom and pop choral serving businesses that sponsor this show, and that includes SightReadingFactory.com, which is a must for everybody, and that includes your singers in your choir, no matter what level they are. That includes you as the teacher. Get that annual membership for you and your students, and then every single time you renew it, you can use Choralosophy at checkout to get 10% off. And then, of course, the new Resonance 95 Singer's Mask, an N95 grade filtration Singer's Mask. And, of course, one of the things that you should remember is that when you are looking for the possibility of upgrading singer's masks for your group, or of any type of mask, is that it's got to stay attached to the face. And when you're looking at these medical grade masks, yes, they are tested better, oftentimes, but they're also not tested on people wagging their jaws around quite a bit. So if you've got a choir that needs to search for something that can allow them to sing freely and move freely under the mask while still getting the best possible balance of function and safety, check out that new Resonance 95 from mymusicfolders.com. And of course, you can enter Choralosophy at checkout there as well to get a discount. Okay, everybody, I am here on the next installment of the Oxford series with Alan Bullard. And we are going to get to know Alan today in a conversation about his life and music and a compositional career. So, Alan, welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast.
Very nice to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me.
I'm excited to get to know you a little bit today. And one of the things that I like to do first, just so that my audience and myself has an idea of who we're talking to here and who we're hearing from. So, Alan, where did you get your first where did you first fall in love with music?
Right. Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think that the first thing was when I was about 8 at junior school, and lots of us learnt the recorder. And so I learned to play the recorder, and I realised that you could actually write music for it as well. And it didn't seem unusual to me. You could buy music paper and, write away. And so I started composing almost straight away. That I started to learn it. And then a few years later, my parents bought me a piano after much pleading from my part. And it was a wonderful experience to just explore chords and to explore harmony and to improvise. And so I think I learned an awful lot just by doing that. Just by doing it, and then I went to secondary school where we had a decent choir, and every year we sang Bach's St. John Passion, and we sang various other pieces, including contemporary pieces like George Dyson's In Honour of the City, which really excited me because of the chords and the harmonies that it used. So that was great. And also, while I was at secondary school, I got the opportunity to obviously to sing all the voice parts, also to play continuo for the Bach, and also to write music for a school play as well. So various things like that. And then I went to the Royal College of Music, and at the Royal College of Music, I studied composition with Herbert Howells. Now, Herbert Howells was then a man in his 70s, a very revered British composer who had written a vast range of music. People know him mostly for his choral music, but actually he did write a lot of music for orchestra as well, particularly in his younger years. And he was a very interesting man to study with. He had a sort of aura about him which I'd never encountered before, that sort of rather old-fashioned composer, mystic sort of person. And I don't think he actually taught me very much by actually telling me things, but just being in the room with him kind of made me kind of do things. He wasn't. He was not in any way a proactive teacher. His lesson began with him saying to the pupil, "Oh, what have you been doing this week then?" It would never occur to him to have set me any work to do.
Interesting.
I had to think myself as to what I was going to do.
That's great.
It was really weird, but it was good, and it was wonderful to have studied with such a important composer in the choral music field. And then I went to Nottingham University, and there I studied contemporary music, the more sort of hardline avant-garde kind of contemporary music, which everybody studied in those days, Stockhausen, Boulez, and so on, and so for a time I found myself writing music that nobody really wanted to hear, but which was fulfilling the ideas of the sort of music that I thought I should be writing. And then I realized that actually what I really enjoyed doing was writing music which people did want to hear, and which people did want to perform, and which people wanted to sing, which people wanted to play. And that was how I got involved so much in writing for choirs, and particularly for amateur choirs. So I suppose that's how I got started.
That's great. That's a great story. And imagine that, writing music that people want to hear. That's great. A good portion of the behind-the-scenes support comes from the Patreon page for the Choralosophy podcast. Doing the show is a lot of work. It costs a lot of money, advertising, getting the word out, making sure that there is always content available for you is not cheap, and it's not free. And there are some folks out there in this audience who recognize that. And they see that there is value in their lives from listening to this show. And there is no better way to interact with one person helping another person who helps them. Like, my goodness, that's the golden rule. So on Patreon, you have the opportunity to do that. If this show is valuable for you, you can jump on over there for as little as $3 a month. There are even higher tiers where you can become a producer. You can check in with me for consultancy if you would like to. There's swag to pick up. There's a private podcast feed, all kinds of cool stuff over there. The producers from the Patreon page, that's patreon.com/choralosophy, are Vasquez Academy of Music, John Warner, Ulrika Igrain Munoz Alarcon, Chandler Smith, David Kowalczyk, Kyle Peterson, Michael Herron, Ryan Main, and Steve and Kathy Kakachik. Thanks a lot. How would you describe your job if someone asked you, if you're in a pub somewhere and someone says, "Hey, what do you do?"
Okay, well, I would say that I'm a musician and I'm a composer. And then I suppose I would try and identify the sort of composer that I was. And I think I'd probably say a modern classical composer. And then depending on how the conversation went, we might get further into the discussion of what a modern classical composer is and how that.
If they're not too bored.
It wasn't a concept. 50 years ago when I was growing up, you didn't have to sort of explain quite so much what you were. But I think the expectation now of the the sort of music that people write. There's such a wide variety of styles that composers write in that it probably becomes more important to try and define what that is. But I think at the end of the day, you've just got to say to people, well, listen and see what you feel about it. And then if somebody would then say to me, well, can you make a living from doing that? And I would say, yes, I can. But it's the living is not just from writing music, it's from arranging music. And in my case, it's a lot of it is from writing music for education, not choral music, but instrumental music, which I've done a lot. And then other things that I do, I used to teach. I don't teach much now. I still do music examining. In the United Kingdom, we have this organisation called ABRSM, Association of the Royal Schools of Music, Associated Board of the Royal Schools of Music, and they offer music examinations in different grades all over the UK and a lot in the Far East as well. And I do a bit of that. At the moment, it's all on Zoom, so I don't have to go anywhere. But in the past, I travelled around different parts of the country and so on.
Right. So, okay. Yeah, that's great. Since this, of course, we're going to start off in our kind of diving into your music a little bit here in the Oxford realm, since Oxford is the partner on this podcast. Tell us a little bit about your choral catalog, and I've talked to several Oxford folks now already, and one of the things I've learned, because I've learned quite a bit about the publishing business just by talking to Oxford folks over the last year. Yeah. I know that sometimes Oxford publishes somewhat exclusively. Sometimes composers have published for multiple different places, shops, so to speak. How does your publication work?
Okay, I'm not tied to Oxford. Some of the composers you talk to, I think, are what they call house composers, which means that everything they do pretty much is for Oxford. In my case, I'm not like that. So I just send them things and they say yes or no. And just occasionally, I might propose something in advance and say, look, I've been commissioned to do this. So would you be interested in publishing it? And they might say yes, or they might say no, we can't really afford to do that. So that's how it worked for me. So I had other pieces published by, for example, in the United States, GIA published quite a few of my choral things, and there are other publishers in the UK. But so it's different for different people.
What are some pieces of yours that Oxford has published that folks should go check out?
Okay, well, probably the piece of mine which is sung most often is a little Christmas carol called Scott's Nativity. Scott's Nativity is a setting of some traditional Scottish words, and I suppose I wrote it in a slightly folky Scottish style. So sometimes people think that it is actually a kind of Scottish song, but it isn't. And that gets sung a lot. Surprisingly, even in Scotland, where one might think they wouldn't really want to sing something that was a bit fake from their point of view. But it does get sung a great deal. And in fact, a Scots choir sung it just before Christmas and put it all out on YouTube, and lots of people saw it. So that was nice. So that's probably the piece of mine which I wrote maybe getting on for 20 years ago now, which is probably sung the most. Another piece of mine that they publish was sung in the 9 Lessons and Carols service at King's College, Cambridge, which is the one that's broadcast all over the place. And that was performed in 2007, I think it was, in the days when Stephen Cleabury conducted the choir. And that was a wonderful experience. We went to that, my wife and I, and to sit in that King's College choir stalls right next to the choir for that service. You know, this is a service where normally people have to queue up all day to get in, and we just walked in, and it was lovely, and that was a great experience. And he did it again, actually, another year. So that was lovely. So that's a piece called "Glory to the Christ Child," and so that gets done quite a lot. That's been recorded by the 16 fairly recently, and other choirs have recorded it as well.
That's exciting. That's exciting.
Yes.
So I'd like to ask a couple questions about your process, because I find it interesting to learn from different composers. I am not a composer. I have written one piece of choral music in my entire life, and it was about 20 years ago, and no one has ever sung it. So I don't think I qualify. But I'm interested in how I've been learning as I talk to composers on the show of how different everybody approaches writing music, and where it starts, where it comes from. You know, of course, composers have to be commissioned oftentimes, and if the inspiration, I guess, starts in that there's a job there. But what I'm really more interested in is when you're sitting down to create a piece. What are some of the first steps? Are you a music first, words later person? Are you a words first, music later person? How does that work for you?
Usually, it's words first, because usually I'm setting a poem that already exists, written by somebody else, and so that is my starting point, and I get to know the words, say them lots of times, and that starts to suggest musical ideas. But sometimes
Sorry to interrupt. Do you say them out loud? Like do you speak the text out loud?
Yeah, I do. Yes.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But sometimes I write my own words. I have done that periodically. And of course, if you're doing that, then you've got the opportunity to think rather more of the words and the music at the same time. And you've got that wonderful feeling where you can actually think, oh, I'd like the tune to do this. I'd like the tune to have a few extra beats in it or something. And you can change the words because they're your words, and do that. So that's a kind of different, slightly different approach. But I think the end result is the same. I'm thinking of a collaboration, as it were, between the words and the music. If I've taken words that a poem that somebody else has written, then I am trying to add something extra to that poem and make a complete whole, and that's through however you've started. So then I might well think to an extent away from the keyboard, away from the piano, but then there'll be a point fairly soon where I'll start to sit at the piano and try things out. It's possible, and I have done it, to write completely away from the piano. But I think nowadays I tend to use the piano rather more, but I take the music away from the piano periodically, look at it, and then, of course, if it's a choral piece, I make sure that I sing every part to make sure I'm happy with the way that each part lies and the way that it goes. Not necessarily in the correct octave, I hasten to add. But so I do that, and then that kind of is the thing that really tells me whether it's going to work. Because ultimately, what I'm doing is I'm writing a piece for people to sing, and a piece for people who enjoy singing to sing, and usually a piece for amateur musicians. So therefore, for musicians who don't have to sing my music if they don't like it. So therefore, I have to take care to make sure that that music is going to appeal to the kind of performers that you're expecting will perform it. And as I say, with me, that's mostly, at least in the starting point, being music for amateur performers. That's what I've done mostly over the years.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to frame it, and I think that's actually really interesting because I picture a composer writing music simply because it is the expression of their soul and what they want to come out. But the way you explain that, you are doing that, but you have to think about will the singer enjoy this? Is this going to be satisfying for them? It's not just about you in that instance, and so that's interesting that you phrased it that way. When you're, tell me a little bit more about that. How do you
Yeah.
know, or what are some musical elements or ideas or examples maybe that you could give of how you've shaped your piece based on that appeal?
Well, I think so much of the work that I've done, not just choral music, but also instrumental music, has been aimed at a particular ability, at a particular standard. I was quoted as saying once that it is as difficult to write a very easy, say grade one, as it were, piano piece, as to write a more complicated one, because you have to think just as much about what's possible and what isn't possible. And I think that's also true of writing for choirs. One of the things that I've been involved with quite a lot, and this is for Oxford, is the series of flexible, the flexible choral series, the Oxford Book of Flexible Anthems, and the new Oxford Book of Easy Flexible Anthems, the Oxford Book of Flexible Carols, and the Oxford Book of Flexible Choral Songs.
Okay.
Volumes of these, and all of these are aimed at choirs, particularly the three that are aimed at churches. They're aimed at choirs where you're not quite sure who's going to turn up on a Sunday morning. I mean, I was at church this morning, and I sing. Sometimes I play, but I usually just sing. We have a director of music, which isn't me. I sing in this small choir, and today I had to sing tenor because we were a bit low on tenors. Another day I might have to sing bass, and there might be another day when there are no tenors at all. And the idea of the flexible series is that the anthems or carols or whatever they are can be performed by different combinations of voices. So if there's no tenors, you can still do it. If there are tenors, there's something for the tenors to sing. If there are no men at all, you can just miss out the men parts and just do it for upper voices. So that flexibility obviously also goes along with the need in the church choir to be writing for amateur singers, and also to be writing for amateur singers who actually need to be able to learn the music pretty quickly, because every week they're going to be singing a different anthem. And so that really colours the way that you write. So, I mean, first of all, making sure, and this is just rudimentary stuff really, but making sure that the shape of the melody actually fits the words, that when you speak the words, say the words, it actually suggests the rhythmic shape and the melodic shape that I've written. Secondly, making sure that the soprano parts don't go too high. You're not writing for coloratura voices. Making sure that the tenor parts are not too high, because you never know, they might be being sung by somebody who's more of a baritone. Just generally thinking about all those aspects that make the difference between something that somebody can learn to sing pretty quickly and something that they can't. Now, if I'm writing a piece which isn't so flexible, like, for example, these two carols that I mentioned earlier, both of which, actually, no, it's not true, because Scots Nativity, you can miss out the lower parts, and you can just sing it for upper voices. And in fact, Oxford have just published it as a solo song as well. So you can do it in all those ways.
Yeah.
But the other one, Glory to the Christ Child, you can only do that with a normal 4-part choir. Uh, but whatever I write, I think I tend to err on the side of safety, because there's nothing worse than singing in a choir or hearing a choir sing your music and just hearing some of it not sounding very nice because you've made the soprano part go rather high or stretched the basses to go to the top of their register or whatever it might be.
Uh-huh.
So I do try hard, um, for my own sake, really, to give choirs something that they can enjoy singing and which will be enjoyable for the audience to listen to.
Yeah, so that's a really wonderful perspective because, of course, you're right. Not every choir is the 16,
No.
and yet they have just as much. You use the word right sloppily here, but they have just as much of a right to enjoy singing in a choir as a professional singer does, and it would be like if I'm a professional skier, I might head down the steepest mountain, but and have a great fun, great fun doing it. But if I'm a beginning skier, I want to have fun too, and I, I don't want to smack my face against a tree, right? So there's got to be a hill for me too, that kind of thing. And so I think that's wonderful. I do have a question about your flexible book. Now is that is it going to be published? Is it going to be published, or is it already published?
No, it's already published.
Already
There are
published, and is it a
four volumes
book
already published. It's a book.
of
I was
multiple
afraid I
songs?
probably couldn't show you, but they're all downstairs
Oh,
now.
that's okay. That's okay. Okay, so then my question about it then is, and you might have explained this, and I just am circling back, and I'm trying to wrap my head around it because I direct a church choir as well, and I was immediately um, interested in taking a look at it because
Yeah,
I have in my church choir, it's kind of they're a wonderful group of musicians, but they're aging voices,
yeah,
and so the ranges are limited, and especially in this time of COVID is up or COVID is down, or all that kind of stuff. And so I have that same situation you described, which is some weeks I don't know who's going to be there.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and so that's interesting. So is everything in the book an original composition by you, or did you collect and curate? How did
No,
that work?
I curated it. It is uh, uh, um, things, pieces really from Renaissance, if not before that, up to the present day,
Okay.
uh, and they're either chosen so that they can be sung flexibly, or they're arranged, in which case by me usually, so that they can be sung flexibly.
I see.
And
So
we also commissioned. Sorry,
no,
yeah,
no, go ahead. So that's kind of what I was trying to drill down
yeah.
on was that. So I was trying to picture if you actually rearranged certain things so that, like a piece, I'm going to throw, I don't know if there's, I'll just throw Palestrina out there, but let's say Palestrina writes something that typically would be 4 to 6 voice parts, and you might rework it so that it could be flexibly sung by various choirs of
Yeah,
different
I
sizes.
might do. It would be pretty difficult actually to do that with Palestrina, simply because of the contrapuntal element.
I see.
Uh,
Okay.
but if you take, for example, I'm trying to think of one that I did like that, a, a Liszt piece that I did, sort of Ave Maria, I think, by Liszt. I can't remember exactly now. There's a few years ago I did these. They're
Yeah.
not at the top of my mind. In which I arranged it so that you could perform it with fewer parts. But yeah, and then also there were quite a few new pieces by a range of composers, including myself, but lots of other people as well. Because by and large, I understand in the United States, you don't buy very many big anthologies. You tend to use a lot of separate leaflets. Whereas in the UK, they tend to buy the big anthologies rather more than the separate leaflets.
Interesting.
So each of these anthologies have about 50 pieces in them.
So, any theories on why we Americans don't like to buy big books and you guys do?
No, I don't know. It's just something that seems to be the case.
I wonder if, and the only thing I could think of is, you know, it, I'm trying to think of in the school setting in the U.S. I don't know what percentage, but it's got to be a very large percentage of any operating choir is in a school.
Right.
Which that's maybe a little bit of a different proportion in the UK. It may be more skewed towards the church in the UK.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I'm thinking about like in an educational setting, I would be less likely to buy a whole anthology book because I would know that there's almost no situation where I would put um, multiple songs from the same book in front of kids because I'm trying to, in an educational setting, I'm trying to get as many things from as many different places in the world and genres and time periods and as much as I possibly can. So that's interesting. I'd never even thought about that
Yeah.
before.
Yeah. I think that probably is the thing. And I'm looking at it from a UK perspective.
Hmm.
If a choir buys an anthology, let's say typically they might be about £15 uh, for such a book. Uh, it doesn't take long to recoup that because it's probably £2.50 for an individual anthem. So you've
Hmm.
only got to sing 6 of the ones from the book, and any others that you sing are a kind of profit, as it were.
Yeah.
So I think from that point of view, it's probably good. And I get the feeling that in the United States, the cost of octavos, separate octavos, is slightly less than what it is in the UK, and so that might
Yeah.
help as well.
I think that's probably true.
Yeah,
That's probably true.
it's probably economies of scale actually, because obviously you've got far more choirs and
Hmm.
print far more copies of things.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Okay. I'm going to take us a different direction a little bit.
Yeah.
So you are, um, let's say you're in actually, I'm going to have you go in your imagination here for this question for a pre-COVID world where things were more normal as it relates to choirs and compositions and, deadlines and performances and commissions, all the things that were so normal to us in 2019 and before. Um, what would you say as a composer in your career as a composer? What are the more stressful things about doing what you do? We've kind of talked about some of the things you've enjoyed doing, and I'm interested in kind of what lights your fire to write music. But then I'm also interested in kind of everybody's job has downsides. So how would you explain that to somebody who like on your we're back in the pub again.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, actually, I think on the whole, I'm extremely lucky uh, in what I do. And when you see the jobs that a lot of people have to do, I really don't think that I'm put under that much stress. But there is stress, and I suppose the stress is, first of all, obviously, it's deadlines. I mean, sometimes people think that composers don't have deadlines. They just write music and, it all happens. But of course, there are deadlines. So there's that aspect of it. Uh, well, I have to say, I mean, I've always been quite good at deadlines. I've never got totally stressed about them. I've always managed to organize things so that I manage all right. Um, so there's that. I think the other, which is a more sort of going on all the time sort of stress, is actually, am I writing the piece that I want to write? Is it good enough? I suppose is it a good piece, or am I just doing what I've done for years and years and years now? Am I just writing the same stuff with different notes, as it were?
Hmm.
Uh, or am I doing something really, really imaginative and different? So I think that worry. I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only composer who has that worry, and it's something that goes along sort of in the background of one's brain for a good deal of the time. So
It sounds like you're describing imposter syndrome. Are you familiar with that? Um,
yes, I've heard of that. Yes,
yeah, it's
yeah,
similar to what you just described. It's just that little nagging. It doesn't necessarily mean it's debilitating, but it's that little nagging sense of doubt of like, am I really doing this well, or am I just pretending to be doing this well?
Yeah, yeah,
That kind
yeah,
of thing.
yeah, yeah. I think that's right. Yes, I mean, and I'm sure I'm not alone. I'm sure that probably many people in many walks of life have a
Yes.
similar kind of thing. Um, but you know that's there's that in the background, and there's also this sort of dichotomy, really, which I've hinted at already, between writing what, if you like, I want to write, and writing what my clients, if you like, or my performers uh, want me to write. And this is particularly acute if it's a commission,
Right.
because if it's a commission, choirs will come to you, a conductor or whatever will come to you and say, we really enjoyed singing such and such a piece of yours. Now we'd like you to write us a piece. And immediately you start thinking, well, do they want something that's like the piece that they really enjoyed, or do they want something different? And when I'm doing a commission, I always try and work with the commissioner to try and get that right, which is not always easy to do. And of course, some people, some commissioners say, oh, you do whatever you want, and that's fine. And you get on with it and you do it. And I suppose it's fine. Others of them do want to see bits of it as you're writing it, and might even come back to you with suggestions, sometimes ones that you don't really want to take any notice of, but sometimes ones that are helpful as well. And so everybody's different, but doing a commission is very much a kind of collaboration between the choir, the choir conductor and the composer. Now, I don't get as involved in it as some composers do. There are plenty of composers doing commissions for choirs, and I think increasingly it's becoming expected of them that they actually go and try it out with the choir, go and talk to the choir, go and do all kinds of things with them. Now, sometimes I might, if it's an amateur choir particularly, they might say, oh, could you come and do a workshop? And I go and do a workshop with them, perhaps on something else of mine or on something they're learning at the moment or something like that. But I don't get too much into the nitty-gritty and the detail of the piece that I'm writing for them. But I know some composers do. And I think I don't think I've ever had a piece which hasn't really succeeded, a commission that hasn't really succeeded.
When you say succeeded, do you mean like received well by the commissioning choir?
Yes, that's
Okay.
what I mean. Yes, yeah.
Yep.
As far as one can tell, and you can't because people are nice,
Right.
But as far as I can tell, it's worked out. I mean, typically, what you get when you go to the performance is after the performance, somebody from the choir will come up to you and say, "When we first saw your piece, I really didn't understand it at all. I didn't know what that was about. I didn't know how we were going to do it. And now we've performed it, and I really enjoyed doing it, and I really love it." And that's the kind of comment I've had more than once, actually. And I think a lot of the success of a new piece is down to the conductor of the choir, isn't it? And if the conductor is enthusiastic about it, then the choir will be enthusiastic about it. And of course, if they've had a piece that they've commissioned, a piece that's especially been written for them, they're going to try really hard and are likely to get enthused. So it's pretty much a win-win situation, provided that the composer is sensible about what he or she expects the choir to be able to sing.
I have one more question for you, and we'll wrap this up. And this is kind of again a reflection on your life and career. If you were to have an opportunity, for lack of a better analogy, I'm going to put you back in the pub. But you are sitting next to the Alan Bullard of your youth, who is beginning to be a composer, right? What are the things that you would give yourself as advice for your career if you were to speak to your younger self?
Right. Now that's a really interesting concept. Yeah. Okay. I think the main thing I would say is, this sounds very trite actually. Be true to yourself, but also think about your performers. But the main advice I would give, I think, would be the practical advice of being much better than I was at, not to put too fine a point on it, selling yourself to performers and to others. I was never very good at that, and I think I may be better at it now. But it's not something that comes naturally to many composers. And when you're a young composer, you don't really have anybody to do it for you. So I think the advice would be actually get to know more performers, write more music actually than I did at that stage in my life. Though I suppose with other things going on in one's life, I probably didn't have as much time as maybe I do now. So I think that would be the main advice. I mean, the thing is, to be honest, it's difficult because it's a totally different world now to what it was, when I was in my 20s, and we were talking 50 years ago. I mean, I'm 75 this year, so 50 years ago, before the days of internet, almost before the days of photocopiers, it was much harder to sort of promote yourself. Today, it's relatively easy to do loads and loads of stuff online, but because everybody is doing it, at the end of the day, it probably doesn't make very much difference. I was just thinking what other advice I would give.
Actually, if you can add stuff, but I want to go back to the one you said before, because I want to put a point on that, which is that the advice about selling yourself, or being willing to self-promote, so to speak, or that because I think it is something that I've noticed that musicians, it's hard to even say that we're not very good at it, but it's also partly we don't want to brag. And
no.
But yet you have to, in order to get people to hire you, essentially. And so there's always this tension of like, do I talk publicly about how that I'm a good conductor or good singer, or whatever it is, and here's why you should hire me. Or do I wait for other people to say nice things about me so that I can use that as promotional material or whatever? So that's interesting. And of course, I wonder too if because of your generation that you grew up in, of course, social media was not a thing. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about watching younger composers come up in a world where if they don't master social media, the composers of our current generation, they won't have a career.
I'm sure that's true. Yes. I don't know. I mean, if they haven't mastered social media, then you don't really know about them, do you? So you don't really know whether they're
right
coping or not. So yeah, I just don't know. I mean, what I think is interesting, if I look back to when I was a music student, and think of the composers that were around then, my colleagues, as it were. Some of them became quite famous. Some of them completely disappeared, and as far as I know, they're probably still around, but not composing. And there must be lots of things that happen in one's 20s and one's 30s, in which one sort of either finds one continues along the compositional road or doesn't. So I think in my own career, I've been very lucky that there have been people who've sort of picked me up along the way. I mentioned Stephen Wilkinson. I mentioned Stephen Cleabury. I listened to Carol. I'd mentioned Philip Brunel in Minneapolis, whom I did a big piece a few years ago, which was done on American public media. He did it with Vocal Essence, and it was broadcast on American public media. I'm thinking of Sarah MacDonald at Selwyn College, Cambridge, who has done lots of my music and made 2 CDs of it. So I've been lucky that people have sort of picked me up, but I am aware that it's a continual battle. And I think for a young composer, it's an even bigger battle, because let's face it, I think there are probably more composers now. There are more people with ambition to be composers, and forgetting about COVID for a moment, as you said, because obviously it's difficult for everybody. Even in a normal situation, there are more composers to go round, as it were. So how people stand out, how people get picked up from that, it's very difficult to say. And I think for any young composer, they really need sticking power. They really need to be able to cope with what appears to be being pushed aside, and to come back and keep at it, because that's the only way. I once sent a piece to I think it was Stephen Wilkinson who I mentioned. I sent him a piece, and 10 years later he got back to me and said, "Oh, by the way, I'd like to broadcast that piece of yours." Nothing in between. He didn't even acknowledge it.
Right.
But that you have to be patient. You've got to have hope, and you've got to have faith in what you're doing. You've got to believe in what you're doing, I think.
That's a really great way to end our conversation, I think, because I think that is a composer, whether he is young Alan or just any young composer listening to that. I think in our modern landscape on social media with composers trying to start their careers, you're exactly right, because if they are brushed aside, which probably happens 10 times a day, and they give up because of that, then you're right. They're not going to be able to weather the storm, so to speak.
Yeah, you can't give up. I mean, we all get knocked back. We all get publishers not taking pieces we think they ought to public take, and all sorts of things. But you have to get over that, and you have to keep going. Yeah,
absolutely. Well said. Well, Alan, thank you so much for joining me today and letting us get a little peek inside your mind.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for listening to this episode. I appreciate you sticking around to the end, and hopefully you were able to get an insight into Alan's mind, and you'll be able to go and check out some of his music, because I am definitely going to go check out that Flexible Voicings book from Oxford, because I think that could be extremely useful in my church choir, and something we could pull out new music for all kinds of occasions that might stretch them, but also be inside of their wheelhouse. So that's an exciting thing. On the way out, of course, always don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, to go to Choralosophers on Facebook and join that group and be part of that conversation. You can also join the Patreon. You can use that promo code. There's all kinds of ways to be a help to the show, but also to be able to give feedback to the show, which is very, very appreciated. See you guys next time.